Good evening, everyone. Welcome. When we were here a year ago, on November 7th, 2008, there was a lot of exhilaration and some exquisite agony in the air. GLAAD had just won marriage equality in Connecticut 3.5 weeks earlier, and Barack Obama had just been elected our president 3 days earlier. At the same time, At that very same time, though, California had also just passed Prop 8. 2 other states had passed anti-gay marriage amendments, and Arkansas voters barred all gay and unmarried people from being either adoptive or foster parents. So it was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. It was a way we were half giddy and half poked in the eye. Well, what about today, 1 year later? Well, as Lee mentioned, we've added Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine to the marriage equality camp here in New England, and Lambda Legal added Iowa back in April. And in 10 days, we trust that the voters in the state of Maine will keep that state in the equality camp for good. But there is also distress out there in the LGBT world. Where are the concrete gains to follow the glowing promises of the Obama administration? We should have equality now, we hear, pure and simple, and we don't. That was surely the message of the young people who marched on Washington 2 weeks ago and those who protested the president's visit to Boston this afternoon. I know I applaud them. There is too little LGBT activism today, not too much. Well, what is the right course of action going forward? How do we get to our goal of ensuring equality and freedom for all LGBT individuals and people living with HIV in every part of their lives, in every state in New England, and indeed throughout our country? GLAAD has spent more than 30 years now working on that goal, and together with all of you and so many others, and with many partners in the 6 New England states, we have taken some giant steps forward, but we cannot kid ourselves into thinking the job is anywhere near done. And even when we reach formal legal equality, then we face the next big step of litigating how to ensure that justice is a lived reality for every LGBT citizen. So I thought I might talk to you tonight briefly about 3 challenges that lie ahead for us. First, the ballot campaigns in California and now in Maine make it crystal clear that what 2 key arenas are where questions of LGBT dignity and equality will be joined. One is the schools, and the other is the churches. Our opponents think they can ride the emotional currents of these 2 areas to victory at the ballot. They did it in California, and they are trying to do it again in Maine. Will gay marriage mean teaching lesbian sex in kindergarten? Will gay marriage mean priests being arrested for hate crimes for speaking publicly against homosexuality? You'll see a little of this in videos at the end of the program tonight. Beyond all the essential dialogue that must take place in our country around these 2 critical issues, there is also the legal arena that must be attended to. GLAAD does and will use the law in every way that we can to protect and preserve our LGBT youth, whether in schools, in foster care, or in the juvenile justice system. Students have the right Students have the right to form gay-straight alliances in their schools. LGBT kids should not be forced to hide who they are, to survive in the foster care system. Teenagers should have some recourse against parents who seek to send them to camp in order to attempt to change their sexual orientation. We have faced all these issues recently at GLAAD. On religion, we live in America under a legal system that has striven for over 2 centuries to find a proper balance between the rights of religious liberty and the civil rights of every citizen. Our laws honor both of these, but that careful balance is under stress today from folks who see LGBT people as posing unique threats to their religious freedom, threats that entitle them to heightened religious liberty protection because they believe, for example, that baking a cake for a wedding reception for a same-sex couple will send them to hell. GLAAD does and will use the law in every way that we can to see that the law stays in balance on questions of religion, reminding our country that we have made serious mistakes in this area before, as when the effort to demolish bans on interracial marriage was seen as an attack on the religion of those who saw the separation of the races as a divine command. The second challenge facing us concerns transgender equality. As raw as lesbian and gay people feel today about the slow pace of change on issues revolving around sexual orientation, recognition that sexual orientation discrimination is wrong and must be addressed has advanced so much further and faster than protection against transgender discrimination. GLAAD and its Transgender Rights Project is litigating and advocating broadly throughout New England to advance the cause of transgender equality. When you boil it all down, discrimination based on sexual orientation and discrimination based on gender identity are rooted in the exact same cause. We all act outside the parameters of what is supposedly, quote, normal for a person with respect to their sex and their gender. God knows our opponents lump us together as one indivisible problem that must be solved, and that is probably the only thing about us that they've ever actually gotten right. GLAAD's unique work has been in the courts, seeking to change the law. And when a case makes it to the highest court of a state or to the United States Supreme Court, that court's decision is likely to last for at least a generation. And that is why litigation must be done carefully and strategically. In the legislatures, we can lose a battle and come back to fight again the next year and the year after that if need be. In the courts, we sometimes only get one chance to get it right. And so what GLAAD has been doing for over 30 years is litigating carefully year after year when the time is right, when the chances of winning are optimal. And that does not mean that we always win. But in fact, I think the state of the law in the 6 New England states today is some proof that our judgment has been pretty good so far. Thank you. That brings me to the third and the final challenge. Today, to this date, GLAAD and others have worked to change the law primarily in the individual states and not through some nationwide change sought in the federal courts. Although we have had some important victories in the United States Supreme Court, including GLAAD's Bragdon win in 1998 for all people living with HIV, and Lambda Legal's victory in Lawrence v. Texas in 2003, bringing an end to the sodomy laws in our country. Today, there is a sense that it is time to assert more efforts in the federal arena, both in Congress and in the federal courts. We have a tremendous backlog of legislation that needs to be pushed. Hate crimes, for one, that finally passed the Senate yesterday, is on its way to the President of the United States. After needing 14 votes on the floor of Congress, it finally happened. But there's so much more. An inclusive ENDA to ban all employment discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, passage of the Uniting American Families Act to end the disgraceful treatment of American families with a non-citizen partner, passage of equal benefits for all federal employees and retirees, and of course the repeal of DOMA. This is all possible if we dig in and also hold our friends accountable for their campaign promises. And I want you to know that GLAAD is working in coalition with other legal and advocacy groups on these various legislative efforts.